Oh, before we get started, I do also have to remind everyone that we are live streaming. Thank you to Mariah for doing that. All right. Always seems like it's been a long day when it's the first day back from the long weekend. So, all right. So now we'll begin with our first discussion item, which is the Heritage Permit application HPA 2022V022 for 44 Henry Street, which is a proposed second-story addition. And I believe Jessica is here to provide a brief presentation. So I will pass it over to Jessica for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is one of Deeksha's applications, but because she's away today, I'll be presenting the comments on her behalf. There should be a PowerPoint presentation to go with it. I don't know if it's up. I don't see it on my screen right now.
Well, maybe just give Mariah a moment to pull that up. I know.
Perfect. There we go.
All right, you're good to go, Jessica.
Okay. So the property municipally addressed as 44 Henry Street is, oh, sorry, actually, can we go to, next slide, please. There we go. So the property municipally addressed as 44 Henry Street is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it's located within the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District. If I could get the next slide, please. Perfect. This application is proposing the construction of a second-story rear addition on top of the existing kitchen space, as depicted in the image below. The proposed new addition is approximately 118 square meters in size, and it has a wood composite cladding that is distinct but complementary color to the existing color of the house. It will also include some new windows that are similar to the existing windows in terms of size, proportion, and materials used. And it will include a gable metal roof that's slightly higher in elevation than the existing roof in order to accommodate the installation of a new shower in the interior. The roof of the addition is sufficiently set back from the streetscape and front facade, and as such, there's no anticipated impacts to the streetscape of the Victoria Park Area HCD. And that concludes my comments on this application.
Great, thank you very much, Jessica. And I believe Mike and Crystal Topham are here to respond to questions from the committee as well. And I believe they're just in the other part of our Zoom meeting. So I will see if Mariah or Amanda would be able to bring them over to be able to respond to those questions. And I will open it up to the committee for any questions of the delegates or any comments. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I don't know. I just have an observation. So how much of this house is actually its original state? Like, it looks like it's all sided. So it seems that we've lost a lot of the heritage value to it already. Is that right? Or am I misseeing something?
Jessica, I know this isn't your project, but are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm just taking a look now. It looks like the siding is for sure new, but its original proportions are intact, as well as some other attributes like the windows, is what I have noted here.
So I guess my question is, if this house were placed not in the heritage district, would it have any heritage value? And it may be an odd question, but it just looks like we're transforming this into something that it was never originally meant to be within a heritage district, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I have the answers to that specific question, like if it was placed somewhere else, whether we would designate that, but I can take a closer look and get back to you if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, how much we destroy the heritage value of a home as these things come to us, and what are we left with? but thank you.
Sounds like a fairly philosophical question for our committee to maybe think about in future as well. So thanks for bringing that up, Councillor Chapman. Other questions? I will also accept motions, as this item does require a motion. Jean?
I'll move the recommendation then as proposed by staff.
Okay. So the recommendation as posed by staff is that pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2022V022 be approved to permit the construction of a second-story addition on the property municipally addressed as 44 Henry Street in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with the application and subject to the following condition: that 1, the final building permit be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. Any concerns, amendments, Jean?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do not have specific concerns, but there's only one little glitch that wasn't clear to me, and it has to do with the roof alignment. And I realize that this is Diksha's report. So I'm just wondering, like, how much of a variance will there be? And would it look like it's slanting up at the back, the roof, where the roof comes to a V at the back? Any idea?
Jessica, are you able to comment?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I don't have exact numbers in front of me right now, but it is noted that it's a very minor difference that won't be significantly visible from the streetscape. And because they are both gabled roof with similar materials, it was determined that, well, there is some difference. It's similar and complementary enough to the existing roof of the historic building.
Right. That's all.
Thanks, Jean.
Mm.
All right, so we do have a motion on the table. I will note that if the application receives unanimous consent from the committee, it can be processed under delegated authority following the committee meeting. Otherwise, it will go to council on September 19th in just under 2 weeks' time. Any comments or concerns on the motion? All right, seeing none, we will vote. And because we're online, we'll do our vote by roll call. So, Councillor Chapman.
I accept. I vote in favor.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Robin.
I vote in favor.
Thank you. Shannon.
In favor.
Thank you. Jean.
In favor.
Thank you. Peter.
In favor.
Thank you. I'm next. I'm in favor also. Ilona.
In favor.
Thank you. And have I missed anyone? All right, seeing none, that does pass unanimously, so it will be processed under delegated approval authority following the meeting. Thank you, everyone. All right, so we will now move on to item 3.2, which is our draft heritage impact assessment for 544 to 550 Lancaster Street West and 26 Bridge Street West. And Jessica will also be providing a brief presentation for this heritage impact assessment. So Jessica, I will pass it over to you once again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, I'll be presenting the comments on Diksha's behalf. So 544 to 550 Lancaster Street West is located on the east side of Lancaster Street. 544 and 546 Lancaster Street West are not designated or listed under the Ontario Heritage Act, but they are included on the inventory of historic building. As such, as part of the complete official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application, a heritage impact assessment was required. So the two buildings, sorry, if I could get the next slide, please. Thank you. The two buildings on the subject property are oriented west towards Lancaster Street West and are built of buff or yellow brick construction in the Gothic Revival architectural style. Over time, the buildings have undergone many additions and alterations. However, the original building remains in good condition, with many architectural features intact. The separation between them has also been identified as a significant heritage attribute during the HIA analysis, and according to the designation criteria outlines in Ontario Regulation 906, the buildings can be considered for designation. The proposed development includes the construction of 5 new buildings with a combined total of 1,281 units and 924 parking spaces. To accommodate the proposed development, the applicant is proposing the relocation of the 2 dwellings on site. When the draft HIA was initially submitted, the site for relocation had not yet been determined, but now it's been confirmed and the address is 26 Bridge Street West. This property does not contain any heritage resources itself, but it is located adjacent to 20 Bridge Street West, which is also a heritage resource as it's included on the heritage inventory. Due to the nature of the proposal and orientation of the buildings, an addendum to the HIA has been included that assesses the impact of the proposed relocation on 20 Bridge Street West. At this point, staff have not gotten the opportunity to review the HIA in its entirety, but we are asking for the committee for its input as it continues to review the HIA and address any comments and concerns to the applicant. And that concludes my presentation, Madam Chair. Oh, sorry, didn't realize there was another slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. And we also have Vanessa Hicks from MHBC Planning to provide a brief presentation on the HIA as well. So Vanessa, I will pass it over to you for your 5-minute presentation.
Thanks, everyone. I'll try to keep it as close to 5 minutes as I can. I did provide staff and clerks with a PowerPoint presentation in advance. I'm trying to share my screen here. Is that me doing that or is that us?
That should be through our staff.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect. Okay. Sure. You can try to make it full screen if you can. It doesn't really matter as long as everyone can see it. So thanks, everyone. And just as a recap from what Jessica had already mentioned, what we're doing here today is we're looking for comments. Given the heritage, well, there's no official heritage status for this property. It's not designated, it's not listed on the register, so there's really no official legislative protection for these properties. So we're not looking for a heritage permit application. We're really looking for a commenting role so that we can continue to work with staff to see that these buildings are conserved in lieu of the proposed development. So we're looking for your comments today. Next slide, please. So here is what the subject property looks like from aerial view. The red indicates the development site and the property of interest to staff is highlighted in yellow. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what it looks like when you're driving by. It's really easy to miss. I think it's kind of been, if anything, underappreciated for years just because of the low visibility from the street. So you really can't see anything. It's really when you get onto the property that you're able to see the buildings. So this is what it looks like when you're driving by on Lancaster Street West. And if you click to the next slide, this is what you see through those trees. So as you can see, it's really got low visibility from the street. There have been some alterations over time. I'll explain what those are over the next couple of slides. If you could click to the next slide. So as you could see that they are Gothic Revival buildings. They are 2 dwellings that are quite close together, which is what we have described as being a more unique feature of the site. The buildings were constructed about 1873 by I.E. Shantz, who was an important guy. He was a former reeve, postmaster, and notable businessman. The buildings were single detached buildings until about the early 19th century, and then they were renovated into the Chateau Lawn apartments. So the front entrances that you're seeing now, like the transom and the kind of inset double doors at the angles there, those are not original. You can see where there was a curved entrance at the front door, and that's been changed. So there are some modifications to the building as it was changed to apartments in the early 1900s. But other than that, the buildings have a lot of original features have been retained. The evaluation that we undertook determined what on the property was of cultural heritage value, whether or not it was a cultural heritage landscape, what other features might be present on the site. And what we determined was that essentially the only heritage resources of the site are the two buildings themselves. They don't have a real relationship to their surroundings. It might have been a farm at one point, but the barn has been removed. All other features have been removed. All of the other lots adjacent have been severed off. So really the only thing of interest is the two dwellings on the site. Next slide, please. So through considering development options with the proponent, there are a range of options, as always, that can be considered. And the original development concept was the demolition of all the features, including the two dwellings. So we completed our heritage impact assessment, determined that these buildings are of value, and that there is it's worthwhile to figure out whether or not there are other development concepts that we could try to investigate, including retaining them on site, relocation somewhere on site, retaining them in situ and relocation to another site. So ultimately what we have come down to is that the proposed development is to relocate the buildings and to ensure that they're conserved off-site. So ultimately, the development concept is being reconsidered. And if you click to the next slide, so this is a rendering of what's being considered for the subject property by the developer. And as you can see, there's probably not a whole lot of room. It's really probably going to be difficult to retain the buildings anywhere on site, which is one of the reasons why relocation is being considered. Next slide, please. So the buildings are proposed to be moved to a fairly short location within the same community to 26 Bridge Street, which you can see on that slide right there. And next slide, please. So this is what the property looks like as you're driving by Bridge Street. And as you can see, there's some grading issues there that would need to be remedied. Next slide, please. So we considered whether or not this receiving site, and it is difficult as always to find an appropriate receiving site, especially one within the local community. This one just happens to be vacant and close by. We determined that the relocation of the buildings, provided that they can be relocated safely, is a relatively minor adverse impact because it doesn't include the demolition or removal of any features that are of cultural heritage value or interest. The buildings are going to be relocated to a site within the community, and they can keep their spatial relationship to each other, which is a unique feature of both of those buildings. And the buildings will remain visible from the public realm, and they'll maintain their, as I said, relationship and proximity to each other. So it's a relatively, a fairly narrow site. And I think I have a more, if you click to the next slide, I think there's a bigger image of the same, it's the same one. But basically the receiving site is a rectangular shaped lot, and the site plan has been thoughtfully designed to consider a range of factors, One of them is the Grand River Conservation Area floodplain, which is, if you look to the bottom right of the site plan, that whole area that's kind of hatched is floodplain. So we have to not only ensure that there is appropriate grading to accommodate the houses, but also to avoid that floodplain area and accommodate parking. So there are some factors that had to be considered for how to include both parking and the houses. We determined that the impact of relocating the houses is minor, and that the views of the building from Bridge Street, basically the buildings can still be visible, and actually they'll be more visible than they are now given the vegetation from Lancaster Street West. And if you click to the next slide, we did complete a views analysis. The site is on an angle, so as you're going through the roundabout and as you're driving down Bridge Street, the buildings will be at kind of a nice angle so that you're still able to see them as you're driving by. It's probably more visible than they are right now. Click to the next slide, please. There you are. And so as you can see, this is just a rendering. I don't know if it'll be, you know, to the millimeter, these kinds of dimensions, but we're trying to accommodate both of the houses and parking as well. And I think that we're making a recommendation to include some landscaping components, so it doesn't look like the buildings are just sat into the site. That's not what it's going to end up looking like. That's just a rendering to show you the kind of scale as far as the buildings and the property go. Next slide, please. And we were also required by staff to provide an analysis of any impacts that might be resulting on the building at 20 Bridge Street. So that red brick building that you're seeing is another inventoried building that's adjacent. And we determined that moving the two buildings next to this other inventory building isn't going to result in any adverse impacts. Next slide, please. So we have a few important mitigation recommendations. First is the submission of a relocation and conservation plan to provide a lot more detail on how the buildings are going to be prepared for relocation, stabilized, repaired, and conserved over the long term. I think that's the most important part. Also, the installation of a commemorative plaque providing information on the history of the buildings and that they were originally located down the street. Now they're located along Bridge Street. And also that a landscape plan be provided that identifies how vegetation can provide a more complementary setting for the dwellings. So like I said, they don't look like they were just sort of plopped onto a vacant or graded site, so that they have a much more welcoming environment, if you will. And I think that's it for my presentation. Again, we're looking for comments and you know, hoping that if you have any ideas or suggestions for how to accommodate these buildings onto Bridge Street, we're more than welcome to have that discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Vanessa. I know it's complicated because there's sort of two heritage impact analyses in this particular agenda item. All right, so I'm now going to open this up to the committee. If you have questions for staff or for Vanessa about the HIA, but as Vanessa and Jessica both mentioned, this is our heritage impact assessment, so staff are requesting feedback from the committee and there's no motion required, so please provide your comments as well. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I have a question that goes beyond the building and the structure itself, but I understand this is somewhat of a cultural art hub that, with the residents that live there. What's happening to them?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any cultural art hub. It's just not within the realm of what we are supposed to identify. my expertise is limited to really identifying built cultural heritage resources, including those which are listed on the register, designated, and identifying the cultural heritage value of those. So that's just really not within the scope of this study.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out, like Alicia Brilla, who's one of our predominant artists in this region, lives on that site. And I know there are others like her that also live there. And I would hope there would be some accommodation to ensure that they're moved into, you know, maybe while the homes are being moved, that they would have accommodation and that acceptable accommodation, and that they would be returned to the homes once they've been moved. So I bring this up because you're representing the developer, right? So I really hope that this is being taken into account.
Thank you. Through the chair, any of these kinds of concerns I think would be addressed through the planning process. So I will thank you for comment, and I will follow up with the developer on that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other comments or questions? Ilona?
Yeah, so I think that these are two really beautiful gems, and it's unfortunate that they have not been listed on a heritage list at this point, or not designated yet. And I think it's important to preserve these buildings. So I do appreciate that this effort is being made to look for another home for them if they cannot be incorporated in situ. I did have a question about its use, and as Councillor Chapman had mentioned, you know, just what the intended purpose will be when it is moved. Will it still be a residence, or is it intended to be used for another purpose?
Through the chair, thanks for that question. I guess I never mentioned that, but yes, they are intended to be residential buildings again. Whether or not they remain as apartments or single detached residence, I don't know. That just hasn't been figured out right now. Right now, we're just trying to get through the first couple of hurdles of figuring out what really to do with them. But residential, they will remain residential. Thanks.
Okay, I did have a second question as well, and that is GRCA permission required to move the buildings to that property?
That's another good question. I know that we have been in contact with GRCA, and I know that through the planning and technical side of things, we have definitely been considered GRCA. I don't think that we need permission to build outside of the floodplain. So I think that we're trying to avoid that specific area, which is why the parking lot is kind of at the bottom left-hand side. So I think that we're trying to avoid that floodplain area, but if we need any permissions or need to work with the GRC any further, we're definitely going to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ilona. I will also just mention quickly that there was a written submission received from Jean, who's one of our committee members on this as well, because I know Jean has to leave very shortly. So that would have been sent to committee earlier this afternoon. So hopefully you've had a chance to see that. Jean, did you want to comment on that quickly before you have to go? And then Peter, I have you next on my list as well. You are still muted, however, Jean.
There. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Sim. Just a couple of comments. I know the area because I was involved with Bridgeport and several of the houses that received heritage designation from 1981 until 1996. And I know the area primarily through a former councillor, Ward Alderman, Grace Stormer, from that area. And these comments, and Vanessa was seeking comments from the committee, and I'm assuming that what I have written will be forwarded through staff to Vanessa as well, on behalf of the developer. That was a very good question on the part of Alona, mentioning with respect to the GRCA. And so that is really the question with 26 Bridge. Can it accommodate these houses according to the regulations of the GRCA? And even though it's not in floodplain, it's fringe floodplain, and the GRCA just had rules about that. The one thing that two things I'd like to highlight. I feel, yes, we're going to put a plaque on where the properties are going to reside, or these structures. But I also feel that there's a context, according to the Historic Village of Bridgeport, that these houses had their position at this particular level. And so for people to understand the context of what has happened to the village of Bridgeport, the modernizing of it, I feel that there should be a plaque at the current site talking about these houses and showing it, as well as the one down the street on Bridge Street. The other thing, the windows are exceptionally rare, those Gothic style with them, what I call the shoelace mullions or muntins. And there must be a way that they can be preserved and incorporated in the new presentation and so on. And also, I cringe every time we take down another building and it's fine bricks, fine materials of the 1880s. They took a lot to live. I really would like to see those reincorporated into the development someplace. And I've written that in my report. 550 Lancaster, even though it looks like nothing particular, I looked at it on site yesterday. I feel that it does have significance, and I wondered, what's the situation with that? Vanessa, do you have any answer?
No, other than the buildings that I reviewed in a heritage impact assessment, we weren't required to include any other buildings or
Right.
properties, rather. Sorry.
Well, I feel strongly that it is, granted, it's probably not on any list, we've missed it, but it's vintage, it's style, the bricks, the leaded windows that are there, they should be looked at and evaluated. And I put that in my report. So thank you, Chair Sam. I'll let somebody else have the floor now. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. Peter.
I can lower my hand there. Thank you. I think this is a good news scenario, in that the ideal thing is there would be an adaptive reuse of the buildings on the site. Sort of like the next best thing is that the buildings are being moved and preserved with all the historic features intact. So I'm quite pleased with this one. I just wanted to say that I think that the Grand River Conservation Authority will be having some greater play in the approval process. Because when I look at the proposed site plan that you have, the relationship between the parkings and the buildings doesn't look like it leaves any room for the front porches of the buildings. Now it gained that space in the rendering, but I think you may have some reconsideration to do on that parking configuration, and it may bring into play something on the GRCA lands. I don't have a solution. It just looks to me like it could potentially be a problem. That's the only point that I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Other questions or comments from committee? Shannon?
Thanks, Tam. I also was going to say very much of what Peter was saying as well, but I guess my question was to Vanessa, and I'm not as familiar with relocating properties, but my question was, what is the success rate of moving a heritage property? And are there any, I guess, implications for moving a heritage property, or what does that process look like?
Thanks for your question. And through the chair, we have seen a lot of heritage buildings successfully relocated, and it is becoming more and more of an option now that we're seeing a lot more density in inner city areas, where we really have to look at other options for how to conserve heritage buildings, either on site or off site. So first of all, yes, it is definitely a viable option to see buildings moved. We always consider whether or not the building can be structurally considered for relocation, because if it's a no-go, then there's no point in spending all this time and effort into doing it, all of this background work to figure out whether or not it can be moved. So one of the first steps we take is to consult with a structural engineer to determine whether or not it can be moved. I believe we've already done that, and we determined that the buildings are old and they're not perfect, but we don't see any structural reason why they can't be supported and relocated. As for what it looks like to relocate a heritage building, it really has to do with hiring a really skilled building mover. And there are skilled building movers. I don't think there's too many of them, and they're quite busy. So in my experience, it can be difficult to schedule them in, but once you get them, they're very good at what they do. They jack up the building and they put structural steel supports underneath it. They brace the building as it needs to be. Then they relocate it slowly down the street, and then they put it on a new foundation. That's essentially what it looks like. Now, the reason why we recommend a relocation and conservation plan is so that we can give staff all of those details before the building's actually moved, so that we all have some confidence as to how the building is actually going to be relocated.
Great, thank you.
Great. Other questions or comments? Garrett.
Hi, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify that a GRCA permit would be required, and there will be additional review. There's a zoning bylaw amendment application for 26 Bridge Street as well. So we can look at those additional land use permissions, including potential expanded home business permissions if there are artisans or if there is creative work that's happening, and that's something where the tenants are going to move with the building. It's something we can definitely look at incorporating within the zoning. So appreciate the discussion today. We're going to take that back as part of the zoning bylaw amendment application, as well as the heritage permit application or the additional heritage permit review that will follow, and GRCA will take a review.
Great. Thanks for that clarification, Garrett. All right, I will take my moment as chair and call upon myself here quickly. And I just wanted to say that this is a huge project that seems to get bigger every time we see it. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate the work that has been put into all of this, especially since I think it's been a year since we've seen this last. And there's been a lot of positive developments in that. And one thing that I want to particularly comment on is that we've seen an increasing number of applications, it seems, over the last few years to move heritage buildings. And one thing that I really appreciated about this impact assessment is that you looked at not just the movement of the buildings, but also the relationship of those buildings to each other as well as to the space around it. And I think that's an important component of the heritage and what those built heritage resources mean and what those meanings are to the community. So I just wanted to note that in moving the buildings and finding new homes for them, finding a place for them where that relationship between the buildings can be maintained, it really does, I think, help to preserve the heritage context of this built resource. So I wanted to mention my appreciation for that. All right, are there any final comments or questions? Incredible. We are ahead of schedule. All right, so thank you to Vanessa for being here. We will conclude our remarks on this draft HIA and look forward to more information as the project continues. So thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to come back to you soon with more good news.
Great,
Bye-bye.
thank you. All right, so we will now move on to our next item, which is our heritage permit application HPA 2022V021, which is 139 Queen Street North, which is the demolition and replacement of the front portico. And Jessica, once again, you've really been sort of thrown in 3 presentations today. So I will pass it over to you for this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the property municipally addressed as 139 Queen Street North is designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it's located within the Civic Centre neighborhood HCD at the intersection of Queen Street North and Ellen Street East. Next slide, please. So this permit application is proposing first the removal of an existing front portico as depicted in the top photo on the screen. Most of this portico doesn't appear to be original to the house, and its removal is required due to it being structurally unstable. A new portico is then proposed to be rebuilt in its place, with the new construction being larger in size, but of a scale to the original portico of the house, as determined through photos that were provided by the applicants and were included in the package or agenda package. It will also be constructed out of beadboard, GAF timberline roof shingles, and permacast columns. And that concludes my presentation for this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jessica. And I believe Sarah Sosnowski is also in attendance to respond to any questions from the committee. So I will open it up to the committee if you have any questions or comments. Peter.
Yes, has this been reviewed by a structural engineer?
Yes, it has. You can tell. We have the drawings done up by Orchard Design, and so they structurally.
They have structural engineers to approve the drawing.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
The reason for my question is that it's a lovely little piece. It's nicely scaled. It fits the house very well. But the open vaulted gable at the front of the portico is that's a contemporary style, right? Not necessarily a historic style. Not that I, disagree with that, but structurally, that kind of gable wants to push the columns out and requires a piece at the bottom or a tension rod or a bottom rafter in order to tie that in. So traditionally, that's why you would see that front gable filled in on a porch like this. So when I see nothing there, it's either that structurally those connections between the columns and beams, which are now so delicate and elegant, actually have to be really quite beefed up, right, in order to resist that moment. So I'm just a little cautious that what we're seeing on the page there may not actually be what we finally end up with when it's built because of that.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you're absolutely right. We discussed this with the engineer. So ultimately, I can you bring up the picture again? Or no, that was just a little. Yeah, sorry. Hi, George. Here, the partner of Sarah. Yeah, you're right. So it's at an absolute peak, right? And what you're describing is a cross brace to stop from the what's it the basically the snow weight pushes out the columns like that. So there are structural ties that you can use to stop that, which we would obviously throw in. And in terms of the joists for the truss itself, probably, I mean, just when I build anything, I go overkill. So probably go 2x8. And for something of that size and the potential snow weight, because that's the only weight that could ever potentially fall on that, I think it's well oversized and can accommodate, basically any weight.
Right. So hence my question, right, for review by structural engineer. I saw that the drawings that you presented were prepared by a general contracting company, right?
Not general contracting, engineer design. So yeah.
So just so that a structural engineer, right, reviewing that would
Provide all of that.
right. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're talking about like detailed drawings for the load and such. So
We have certain phases that we have to go through with the design company. So that's phase C. So we haven't paid yet for the actual detailed drawings, but they were like, here, bring these to the Heritage Committee just to show.
so but my concern is that what we're seeing here may not be the thing that is exactly built.
Well, like what's the
Potentially, just because if they ran into anything, but I have faith that they have taken it into consideration and that they would use
I think
George is describing, but I don't have the phase C yet. So-
If I may, Peter, there is a condition in the staff recommendation that final building permit drawings are reviewed and heritage clearance provided. So this could potentially be part of that condition, is to see that there's been essentially that the what ends up being the finalized design that has been reviewed by the engineers would be reviewed by heritage planning staff to ensure that it conforms to what we've been presented with.
I think that would be an appropriate level of review.
Jessica, does that, and Garrett, to staff, does that seem appropriate within that condition?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that would be fine. And yeah, like the condition to review the final drawings during building permit stage is included in there already.
Excellent. All right. Peter, did you have any other concerns?
No. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Ilona.
I just have a comment, and I wanted to commend the applicant for putting the effort into researching this property and trying to replicate the original portico. So I really felt their passion for the heritage was evident in the application that they brought forward. That corner in particular, the Queen and Ellen Street corner, is a very highly visible property. So it deserves to be restored, and I do commend the applicant for doing that. So thank you. I did have one small question, and that was, did you find any evidence of whether the original roof was either flat or peaked? Because I did see the one picture, but I didn't see any evidence as to what the original might have been.
That's such a good question, because if we found something, then that would take away any guesswork in terms of, cultural relevance for this particular building. But no, that picture is actually from 1912 anyway, and the house was already 70 years old at that point. So I can't even say if that portico is original. That's just that's the earliest rendering that we have of that front.
The house is
area.
so old that cameras weren't invented when the house was built.
Well, that's true, but I know that Georgian style can typically have that flat roof. This is just totally a personal thing. And its point is a personal,
and it's conducive to what's there right now.
yeah.
I don't know. It's like we could do something like very extravagant. I think you guys know, if you know, the area across the street does have the flat, like double pillar. And I think it would kind of seem maybe a little strange if we did this like a similar, like we basically have the same size, well, the same style house where it's just basically a square house. But yeah, it's up to you basically if you like our design. We didn't really know what to do. It's like we just want something nice.
Well, I think it's going to be an improvement. What you're proposing will be an improvement. So
Thank you. That means a lot.
Absolutely will.
Great, thanks, Ilona. Other comments or questions from committee? Also happy to take a motion.
I move the motion.
All right, thank you, Ilona. So again, if this application does receive unanimous consent, that it can be processed under delegated approval authority following the meeting. Otherwise, it will go to council on September 19th. So the recommendation or the motion recommended in the staff report is that pursuant to section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2022V021 to permit the demolition and replacement of the front portico on the property municipally addressed as 139 Queen Street North be approved in accordance with the supplementary information submitted with the application and subject to the following conditions. One, that final building permit drawings be reviewed and heritage clearance provided by the heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of a building permit. All right, any concerns or questions regarding the motion? All right, seeing none, we will move to our vote and we will once again do it through roll call. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I support the report.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud?
I support the report as well.
Thank you. Martin has joined us. Martin?
Thank you. Yes, in favor. I support.
Thank you. Robin?
I vote in favor. I support.
Thank you. Shannon?
In favor.
Thank you. Peter?
In favor.
Thank you. I am next. I'm also in favor. Ilona?
In favor.
Thank you. Have I missed anyone? All right, seeing none, that passes unanimously, so it will be processed under delegated approval authority following the meeting. So thank you to Sarah Sosnowski and partner for joining us. All right, so we will move then on to our next item, which is our subcommittee updates. And today we're going to start with Martin. For our subcommittee on heritage designation and affordability.
No major updates, but I would I'll just mention that with Jordan Baker resigning not so long ago, we're looking for other members that might want to join.
All right, thank you, Martin. Any questions for Martin? All right, I will then move on to Robin for the subcommittee on decolonization and the heritage process. So Robin.
Yes, you weren't here last month, which is okay, but basically we had a meeting in June with a few folks, and we're waiting as for the next sort of round of heritage committee applications to come in, which I believe is due next week for people who I want to stay sitting on the committee, ? I can't remember what day it is, but it is very soon. In terms of, because the city is putting in place more DEI stuff in terms of collecting demographics and figuring out who's going to be on the committee. And so I think that essentially we are waiting now until the fall has happened.
Great, thanks, Robin. Questions for Robin? All right, Peter, we'll go to you next for, sorry, I can't remember the name of your subcommittee off the top of my head, heritage designations.
Subcommittee. US, the designation subcommittee met on Wednesday, August the 31st, and continued our review of buildings of heritage interest. And that is ongoing. We also got the first round of comments back from our question section. So as we review the buildings, we have questions that come up for staff. And we've added another tab on there, and Diksha is good enough to answer our questions. So at the beginning of the meeting, we looked back and saw whether there were any additional follow-ups that were needed. And I think the system is working out well. So we are going to carry on with her meeting next month.
Great, thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter? Right, thanks, Peter. And Councillor Michaud, I believe, is going to provide the report for
Jean. Oh,
for Jean on the subcommittee on public engagement.
I don't even know what the name of it is. Publication, marketing, kind of heritage. Anyways, yeah, we've been meeting regularly, actually, on a monthly basis for a number of months. Now it's heating up to every other week, I think, now to meet. We're doing a walking tour of Lower Dune, and Barb Thomas and Ilona, I'm going to butcher her name, Bodendorf, two residents of Lower Dune, are really taking the lead on this, and as well as myself and Jean helping them along the way. So we'll be promoting that through social media, and we're just taking a page from really the walking tours that have been happening downtown and whatnot, and across the city. Lower Dune's got a lot of history, and between Jean and Barb Thomas and Louisa Stevenson down there, it's incredible, the story that can be told. So they haven't mapped it out entirely, but I know it's going to be starting at Homer Watson Gallery, and we'll be spending some time up there, and then they'll be going down all the way to where the Willow Lake Park was, and then up around where the railroad tracks were. And it's just a really interesting story walk that we are looking, the date, I believe, is tentatively set for October 16th.
Great, thank you so much, Councillor Michaud. Any questions for Councillor Michaud and the subcommittee on, I'm just going to call it public engagement today. All right. Thank you, Councillor Michaud. So thank you everyone for the updates on all of your subcommittee work. I will briefly note that this is, I believe, the second last committee meeting of Heritage Kitchener this term, because we do not meet in October because the municipal election is happening, and then November is our last meeting as a group. So what I would like to do for continuity's sake, because I know some of us may be returning to the committee, some of us may not be, is if we could, for our next meeting in November, just have a brief description of what our subcommittees have been up to, and sort of a couple of bullet points of notes of things that we would like to see moving forward, just so that when the new committee convenes in the January of 2023, they will have some notes from us for some continuity's sake. I think that would be really helpful. So I can follow up with our subcommittee chairs as well to make sure that we can facilitate that moving forward. But I wanted to mention it because I think we often forget that we're coming to the end of our term at this point in the year. So. All right. And as Robin mentioned, just while we're on the subject of this, I believe applications for municipal committees are due September 19th. So if you do want to stick around, you should make sure to submit your application. If you know others who would be interested, please let them know as well. All right, anything else on our subcommittees that anyone would like to mention, Ilona?
It's not about the subcommittees, but I did have a question about the new term and what kind of training program is going to be put in place to educate the new members of the committee that are coming on.
That's a great question. It looks like we have several members of staff here, and I'm hoping one of them might be able to answer that question for you.
Yes, so we anytime there's a new committee, we will do training, and we do that as well when there's new terms of council. So there's going to be a lot of different training to roll out. A lot of our advisory committees and other committees will have new members in the next few months. So yes, absolutely, we will provide training to new members of all the various committees.
So is it virtual or is it going to be in person? Is it going to be more than just being copies of presentations to review, or is there actually going to be someone leading you through the presentations?
So we're still developing what that's going to look like. It's going to be, in my mind, more comprehensive than it has been in the past. So whether it be virtual or in person, I don't know that yet. It's really, there's a variety of factors we'll have to consider before we start to roll that out. But it is top of mind as we come to the end of terms of all of our committees. So each one is better than the last. So if you have ideas, or if you think, I really wish I would have received this training, that perspective would be very helpful as we start to develop and figure out what training we're going to deliver. And I don't need that right now. If you want to send me an email, we're always happy to revise the training that meets the needs of our committee members.
So I joined midterm, so all I received was copies of the presentations for my own personal review. And if you don't have a strong foundation in heritage, you really don't know where to begin, and there isn't enough provided in these presentations when you're just reviewing them on your own. So I would really appreciate if there was a guided, somebody guiding you through those presentations and being able to answer questions.
Okay, something we'll take away. Thank you.
Also, sorry, through you, the chair, I just wanted to confirm the last date to submit those applications is September 16th.
Thank you very much, Mariah. So September 16th. Make sure you get your applications in. Other questions or comments? We've sort of moved into our information items here a little bit. All right. So briefly, we do have our our status update on heritage best practices and 2022 priorities, as well as heritage impact assessment follow-ups as an agenda item. Jessica, is there anything that needs to be updated here?
Through you, Madam Chair, I do not have any updates at this time, no.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. All right, so we will then move to our heritage permit application tracking sheet, which was included in your agenda package. And I believe there have been some things that have been updated there. So hopefully you had a chance to review that. Any comments or questions or concerns from committee? All right, well, seeing none, thank you all for a very efficient meeting. And we will see you all in November for the last meeting of our term. Enjoy your September, whatever that means for you, and get out and vote in the October election. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.